Martha Bell had not stopped to think. The door was unlatched. The child inside was crying, and she had been cooking for strangers since she was old enough to hold a spoon. So she pushed it open, found a hollow-cheeked boy too weak to reach the shelf above him, and she started a fire in that cold stove. 20 minutes later, she had a pot of beans going when she heard the boots on the porch. The rifle hammer clicked. The barrel pressed cold against the base of her neck. She did not drop the spoon. If you are new here, please subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment with the city you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. She did not turn around right away. That was the first thing Caleb Whitaker noticed. Most people, when they heard a Winchester cocked 3 feet behind their head, spun around fast enough to knock something over. This woman kept stirring. Slow, steady circles with a wooden spoon, like she had all the time in the West and not one reason in the world to be afraid of a man with a gun. "Turn around slow," Caleb said. "Both hands where I can see them." She turned. She was broad-shouldered and heavy-set with a sunburned face that had seen too many summers, and a dress so worn at the hem, it looked like the road itself had chewed on it for miles. Sweat ran down her collar. Her dark hair had half escaped its pins. She looked at him the way a woman looks at a man she has already sized up and decided is not the most dangerous thing she has faced today. Steady, tired, and mildly inconvenienced. "Lower that gun," she said. "Your boy was starving before I got here." Caleb did not lower the gun. He looked past her. Eli sat at the table with both hands wrapped around a tin bowl eating beans, with the focused desperation of a child who had not had a real meal in longer than any child should ever go without one. 5 years old, cheeks gone hollow, his shirt hanging off his shoulders like it had been made for someone twice his size. Eli looked up. "Pa," he said, "she made beans." Caleb's jaw tightened. To his right, Clara stood between the stranger and the back door with a kitchen knife in both hands and her feet planted. She was 9. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and in the 8 months since Catherine died, those 2 things had kept Eli alive almost as much as anything Caleb had managed. "I found her in here," Clara said. Her voice was flat-controlled, older than it had any right to be. "I told her to leave. She wouldn't." "I heard the little one crying from the road," the woman said. She had not broken eye contact with Caleb since she turned around. "Door wasn't latched. I knocked twice. Nobody answered." "That is called trespassing," Caleb said. "And leaving 2 children alone in a house this hot with nothing to eat is called something too." She let that sit for exactly 1 second. "I did not learn that word in church, so I will not say it here." Caleb kept the rifle level. His hands were steady. He was good at keeping things steady. He had been doing it for 8 months. The ranch, the cattle, the bills, the children. Holding everything still through sheer will, while the drought burned everything around him down to stubble and cracked earth. He was good at it. He was also so tired of it that some mornings his bones ached before he even got out of bed. "Who are you?" he said. "Martha Bell." "Most people say Maddie. I am a widow out of Lampasas County. I have been cooking since I was 9 years old. I bake bread, cure meat, stretch $1 further than most men think is possible, and I do not steal." She glanced at the pot behind her. "Those beans are yours. I only heated them and added salt. Found 2 dried onions in the crock near the window and a strip of fatback that had about 1 more day before it turned. Everything in that pot belongs to you. I just made it edible. Mama kept onions in that crock," Eli said softly to no one in particular. Clara made a sound that was not quite a word and stared at the floor. Caleb lowered the rifle. Not all the way he kept it at his side, one hand loose on the stock, but he lowered it. "How long have you been walking?" he said. 6 days. She said it without apology or performance, just fact. "I came from Meridian. There was a household looking for a cook. When I arrived, the woman of the house took one look at me and said she would not have someone of my figure representing her home." "Your figure," Caleb repeated. "She meant my size." Maddie said it evenly, the way someone says a thing they have practiced being calm about. "I am a large woman. I have spent most of my life being told that means I am lazy, greedy, and undisciplined. It does not make me those things. It only means I have heard that particular speech more times than I can count, and I have stopped arguing with people who have already made up their minds. The kitchen was quiet except for the scrape of Eli's spoon against the bottom of his bowl. "Is there more?" Eli asked. "Yes," Maddie said, still looking at Caleb. "If your father says it is all right." Caleb looked at his son. The bowl was empty. The boy's hands were still wrapped around it, like he was afraid it might be taken away. "Give him more," Caleb said. Maddie turned to the stove without a word and ladled beans into Eli's bowl. The boy said thank you twice. She ruffled his hair once briefly, the way a woman does when her hands know kindness before her mind decides whether it is wise. "Clara," Caleb said, "put the knife down." Clara set it on the counter. She crossed her arms instead. Her eyes did not leave Maddie. "I don't trust her," Clara said. "You don't have to," Maddie said, settling the ladle back in the pot. "You just have to eat." Clara looked at the bowl Maddie slid in front of her. She stared at it for a long, deliberate moment, testing something, deciding something. Then she sat down and picked up her spoon. She ate slowly, carefully, like she was keeping score. Caleb pulled out a chair across the table. He set the rifle against the wall within easy reach and watched this woman he had never seen before who had walked into his house and cooked supper. "What is it you want?" he said. "Work." She poured a cup of water and set it near him without being asked. "I am not looking for charity. I will cook, clean, mend, manage the household, tend a garden if there is one, and handle whatever needs handling indoors. In return, I need a place to sleep, 2 meals a day, and $1 a week. I have references in Lampasas and in Comanche if you want to write for them." "That is a hired hand arrangement," Caleb said. "That is what I am offering. You don't have family, somewhere else to go." Something moved through her face. Not pain exactly, more like a door swinging shut, quiet and final. "I had a husband," she said. "He died 3 years ago. We had no children. His family did not want me after he was gone. My family is in Georgia. My father remarried, and his new wife made it clear there was not enough room in that house for me." She stopped. "So no, I do not have somewhere else to go. I am heading west, but I cannot get there without money, and I cannot earn money without work, and I cannot find work when no one will have me." Caleb looked at his knuckles on the tabletop. The skin had cracked from the dry air. He had not noticed until just now. "You could try town," he said. "Millhaven's got a boarding house. Mrs. Crane might take you on." "I walked through Millhaven this morning," Maddie said. "Mrs. Crane told me she runs a respectable establishment." She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. He knew Mrs. Crane. He knew exactly what those words meant coming from her. He was quiet for a moment. Then he saw it. Clara had stopped eating. She was watching him, not Maddie him, and beneath the table, moving with the practiced quiet of a child who had learned to do things without being seen. She was tearing a small piece of biscuit from the edge of her bowl and tucking it carefully into her apron pocket. Saving it. For tomorrow. Because she had learned sometime in the past 8 months that she could not be certain tomorrow would have food in it. The anger Caleb had been holding since he rode up and saw smoke coming from his own chimney, that anger he had been ready to use, had wanted to use it, did not leave him exactly. It turned into something worse. It turned into shame. He looked away from his daughter's apron pocket. He looked at the table. He made himself breathe. "You can't stay here," he said. His voice was lower than before. "I am not asking to stay," Maddie said. "I am asking for work, on this ranch, which is where I stay." "Then yes, I would be on the property, in a hired capacity." "It ain't proper. A single woman out here alone with a man and 2 children. Maddie studied him for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was not unkind, but it did not move an inch. "Mr. Whitaker, I have walked 6 days through open country alone. I have been turned away from 4 jobs, 2 towns, and 1 church that was offering food to travelers until I came through the door. Proper stopped being my first concern around day 3. She folded her hands on the table. I am not asking you to vouch for me. I am not asking you to tell anyone I am here. I am asking for 1 night's rest and the chance to show you I am worth keeping on. You can put me out in the morning if you decide I am not. Caleb looked at Clara. Clara looked back at him with her chin up and her gray eyes flat, and she did not say a single word. He looked at Eli, who had finished his second bowl, and was now sitting with his head slowly dropping toward his chest, his small hand still loose around the tin. And then Eli's head tipped forward, and his eyes closed, and he was simply asleep. Right there at the table. Too full and too exhausted and too little to fight it any longer. Caleb had not seen that in 8 months. His son asleep at the table because he had eaten enough. He stood up. He walked to Eli without a word, lifted the boy gently. Still too light, God still so much too light, and held him against his shoulder. Eli stirred, but did not wake. He only pressed his face into his father's neck and breathed. There is a storeroom off the back hall, Caleb said, not looking at Maddie. It has a cot. Used to be where my hired man slept before I had to let him go. He moved toward the hallway. There is a bolt on the inside of the door. I noticed, Maddie said. He stopped walking. He turned back. She was already at the table, stacking the bowls with quiet efficiency, moving the way a woman moves when she has cleaned up after other people's meals her whole life and does not need to be told where things go. She did not look at him. Why did you stop? He said. On the road. You could have kept walking. Most people would have. Maddie set the bowls down. She was quiet for a moment, and he thought she might not answer. He was crying, she said finally. Your boy. He was sitting on the porch step, crying the way children cry, when they have been at it too long and they cannot remember anymore what started it. They are just... She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. I know that sound. I have heard it from the inside of it, and I could not keep walking while I heard it. Caleb looked at her. He did not say anything. There was not anything to say that would not sound like either too much or too little. Good night, Mr. Whitaker, she said. He carried Eli to bed. He came back for Clara, who was still at the table, and informed him she was 9, not a baby, and she could walk herself. Is she staying? Clara said. 1 night. Then what? Then I figure out what comes next. Clara stood up from the bench and gathered her skirt and walked toward the hallway, like she was walking into something she had already braced herself for. She is not our mother, Clara said. I know that. I don't want her thinking she can be. Caleb crouched down to his daughter's level. She held herself very straight and looked back at him with those eyes that were too old, too careful, too practiced at not showing fear. She is a hired woman who needed a night's rest, he said. That is all. Clara studied his face. You don't believe that either, she said. She walked herself to bed. He stood in her doorway until her shoulders dropped and her breathing slowed, and she let go of whatever she had been carrying all day. Then he went back to the kitchen. He stood in front of the stove and looked at the pot of beans still sitting warm. He could still smell the salt, the fat back, the faint ghost of the onions. His wife's apron was folded neatly on the counter. He sat down at the table and put his face in his hands. He did not cry. He had not cried since the morning they put Catherine in the ground, and he would not cry now. But he sat in his dark kitchen and breathed long and slow, and he let himself feel just for a minute how tired he was. Bone-deep, 8 months long, no end in sight tired. He had lost 2 calves to the heat this week. The well was dropping. There were bills from the feed store he had been rotating to the bottom of the pile every time he looked at them. He had promised Eli he would fix the wheel on the boy's little wagon more than 3 weeks ago. And Clara had not laughed. Not truly, not the real sound of it, since her mother died. He heard a door open down the hall. Light footsteps. Maddie came back through the kitchen past him without looking at him. Checked the fire in the stove, banked it properly. For the night straightened the pot lid, wiped down the stovetop with a rag, and turned back toward the storeroom. She stopped when she saw him still sitting at the table. "You should eat something yourself," she said. "I am fine." "You are not fine." She said it without cruelty, just with the directness of a woman who has stopped softening things for people who need the truth more than they need comfort. "You are a man who has been running a ranch alone through the worst summer in 10 years with 2 children and nobody to help him and too much pride to say so. There is still food in that pot." "I said I am fine, Miss Bell." She looked at him for a moment. He expected argument. She did not give him any. "All right," she said. She turned toward the storeroom. "Miss Bell?" She stopped. He kept his eyes on the table. He had started to say something. He was not sure what, something about Clara's apron pocket, or Eli's face when he fell asleep, or the fact that he had ridden up to his own house tonight, expecting to find silence and dust and 2 more children. He had failed by another inch. He did not say any of it. Maddie spoke first quietly, like she already knew what was sitting in his chest. "You are keeping this ranch alive, Mr. Whitaker. I can see that. The fencing, the cattle, the water trough, all of it still standing, still tended. You are keeping it alive." She paused. "But a ranch is not the same thing as a home." "I know," he said. She waited. "I know," he said again, quieter. She went to the storeroom. The bolt slid home on the inside of the door. Caleb sat at the table a while longer. Then he got up, ladled beans into a bowl, and ate them cold, standing over the counter, because he could not bring himself to sit back down at that table like a man eating supper. They were good. Salted right. The fatback had given them a depth he had not tasted in he could not say how long. He finished the bowl. He washed it. He hung it up. He went to the porch. The night air was barely cooler than the day. The sky was enormous out here, the way it always was in Texas, more stars than a man could ever count. But tonight, all that open space just felt like a lot of emptiness pressing down. He heard cattle shifting somewhere in the dark, the windmill turning slow. Somewhere far off, something called once and went quiet. He thought about Clara's apron pocket. He thought about a girl who had quietly learned not to count on tomorrow. He stood on that porch for a long time. Long enough that the stars shifted overhead. Long enough that the night started making its slow turn towards something that was not yet morning but was done being fully dark. Then he went inside. In the storeroom at the back of the house, Martha Bell lay on a narrow cot with her boots set side by side on the floor, and her dress still on because she was too tired to do anything about it. Her feet ached. Her back ached. There was a quieter ache beneath those lower and older, the kind that comes from being looked at a certain way for so many years that you start to look at yourself that way too. She had told herself when she left Meridian that she was done flinching. She was almost done believing she deserved to. She stared at the dark ceiling of a stranger's storeroom and listened to the house settle around her. She could hear the windmill. She could hear faintly the soft sounds of children sleeping somewhere down the hall. When she had walked through that door today and found that little boy hollow-faced reaching for something on a shelf, he was too small to reach, too exhausted to cry anymore. But crying anyway. She had not thought about propriety or prudence or any of the practical reasons a woman alone should not push open a strange door. She had thought, not this child. Not while I am standing right here. She turned onto her side and pulled the thin blanket up. Tomorrow, she told herself, he would most likely put her out. He seemed like a man who talked himself back into good sense by morning. Too proud, too careful, too accustomed to managing everything on his own to let a stranger stay who had not been properly vetted and invited. He would leave a coin on the counter and ask her to be gone by midday. She would go. She was practiced at going. But tonight she had fed 2 children. Tonight, somewhere down the hall, a little boy was sleeping with a full stomach who had not had one in longer than any child should have to go without. Tonight, she had done exactly the right thing, and she had done it without anyone's permission. Whatever came next, no one could take that back. Martha Bell closed her eyes. She was asleep before the windmill had time to turn twice more. She was already up when Caleb came out of his room. That was what stopped him in the hallway. The smell. Coffee. Real coffee. Not the thin, burned stuff he had been stretching for weeks, and something warm and yeasty coming from the kitchen. He had not smelled bread baking in this house since. He did not let himself finish that thought. He found Maddie at the stove with her sleeves rolled past her elbows and flour on her forearms, and her hair already pinned back like she had been up long enough to get herself properly organized. The fire was going. The table was wiped clean. 3 cups were set out. She did not look up when he came in. "Coffee's done," she said. "Bread needs another 20 minutes. I found cornmeal in the back of the pantry and made a small cake for the children. There are 3 eggs. I didn't cook them yet because I didn't know how you take yours." Caleb stood in the doorway. "I told you one night," he said. "You did." She pulled the bread pan from the oven shelf and set it on the counter with a folded rag beneath it. "I was up before first light. I thought I would make breakfast before I left. That way the children would eat before the heat got bad." "You made coffee," he said. "I did." "That's a 2-hour pot of coffee." She looked up at him then. Not apologetic, not defiant, just honest. "I suppose I made a decision somewhere around 4 in the morning. I thought I ought to stay long enough to be useful and then let you decide if that was worth continuing." Caleb looked at the 3 cups on the table. He looked at the bread. He looked at this woman who had been up since before the stars went pale, working in his kitchen while he slept, and he thought about the bills under his boot box, and the 2 calves he had lost this week, and the fence line on the south quarter that was one more dry wind away from coming down. He pulled out a chair and sat down. "I take mine plain," he said. She poured him a cup without a word. He drank it. It was the best coffee he had tasted in 8 months. He would not say so, but he drank the whole cup before she had finished putting the bread on the cutting board, and she refilled it without being asked. That was the morning Maddie Bell did not leave, and every morning after that, she was already in the kitchen before Caleb came through the hallway. By the 3rd day, Clara had stopped pretending she was going to run Maddie off. She had not accepted her Caleb could see the distinction clearly in his daughter's face every time she moved through a room where Maddie was working. Clara had simply recalculated. She had spent 2 days looking for a reason to distrust this woman beyond the bone-deep instinct of a child who had lost one person already and was not about to let herself be set up to lose another. She had watched Maddie carefully, the way a small animal watches a larger one looking for the wrong move, the impatient gesture, the moment when the mask slipped, and the real thing underneath came out. The mask did not slip because there was no mask. What Clara saw instead was a woman who got up before the household and worked until after it settled, who took no extra food for herself, who mended a shirt and asked nothing for it, who never pushed into spaces she had not been invited into. That did not make Clara trust her, but it made her stop standing in doorways with a knife. Eli, on the other hand, had no such reservations. By the 2nd morning, he was following Maddie from room to room like a duckling that had decided she was the relevant authority on everything. "Maddie," he said, climbing up on the stool beside her while she sorted dried beans on the counter. "Do you know how to make pie?" "I do," she said. "Mama used to make pie on Sundays." Maddie's hands kept moving across the beans. "What kind?" "Apple. Also peach. Peach was the best." "Do you have a peach tree?" "Out back." His voice dropped a little. "Papa didn't pick them this year. They mostly fell." She was quiet for a moment. "Then next Sunday," she said, "you and I are going to go out back and find whatever ones are still good on that tree, and we are going to make a peach pie." Eli looked up at her with his whole face. "You mean it?" "I don't say things I don't mean." He nodded with great seriousness, the kind of seriousness a 5-year-old reserves for the things that matter most. He picked up a dried bean and examined it. "Maddie," he said, "are you going to stay forever?" Maddie set down the bean she was holding and looked at him, really looked at him, this hollow-cheeked little boy, with his father's serious jaw and his mother's soft eyes and crumbs on his collar from breakfast. "I am going to stay for as long as I am needed," she said. That is the honest answer. I need you, he said simply. So does Clara. She won't say it, but she does. Don't you dare tell her that, Maddie said. She will deny it so hard, she'll pull something. Eli laughed a real laugh startled out of him without warning, and the sound of it was so sudden and alive in that kitchen that Maddie had to look back at the beans so he would not see her face. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Clara appeared in the doorway. She had heard the laugh. She looked at Eli on his stool, easy and laughing, and something moved through her expression fast and complicated, gone before it fully arrived. Eli, she said, come help me with the chickens. I'm helping Maddie. The chickens need water. Maddie needs me to sort beans. Eli. Maddie glanced over at Clara. Go help your sister, she said. I can manage. Eli slid off the stool without argument because Maddie had said it, and that carried weight now in a way he could not articulate. Clara watched him come toward her. She put her hand briefly on his shoulder. She looked at Maddie across the kitchen with those gray eyes. Thank you, she said. It cost her something. You could hear the price of it in every syllable. Maddie nodded once. Clara took her brother to the chickens. The first real fight happened on the fourth day. Maddie had asked Clara gently if she wanted to learn to make biscuits. Clara had said no. Maddie had not pushed. But later, when Clara was standing at the counter staring at the flour and the tin of lard with the expression of someone who wanted something badly and refused to admit it, Maddie came and stood beside her without a word. She measured the flour. She made a well in the center. She dropped the lard in. She did not invite Clara to do anything. She just worked right beside her within arm's reach. Clara lasted about 4 minutes. Then, with an expression that suggested she was acting entirely against her own judgment and better nature, she reached over and picked up the second wooden spoon. They made biscuits in silence. Then Clara said, You're doing it wrong. How's that? Mama cut the lard in. She didn't mix it like that. Your mama was right, Maddie said. This is a different method. Both work. Hers gives you a flakier biscuit. Mine is faster. You hungry now, or you want to wait for perfect? Clara's mouth pulled sideways. She said nothing. What you do, Maddie said, is use the tips of your fingers, not the whole palm. Heat from your hand starts melting the fat, and that's what makes it tough. Your mama probably knew that without being told. She knew everything about biscuits, Clara said quietly. That doesn't surprise me one bit. Maddie kept her voice steady. She raised a daughter who jumped straight to correcting my technique without being asked. That takes a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Clara went very still. Then just barely, just the edge of it, she almost smiled. She pressed her lips flat immediately. But it had been there. I still don't trust you, Clara said. You don't have to, Maddie said. Now press that cutter straight down, straight up. Don't twist it. Twisting seals the edge and they won't rise. Clara looked at her sharply. How do you know I twist it? Because everybody does the first time. Clara pressed the cutter into the dough. Straight down, straight up. The biscuits rose beautifully. Clara stared at them when they came out of the oven and did not say a single thing. But she took the first one off the pan before Caleb or Eli, and she ate it standing at the counter with her back to the room, where no one could see her face while she did it. What Caleb noticed on the 6th day was not the biscuits or the flour-dusted table where Eli was learning his letters or the mended shirts on the line. It was not any single thing he could point to. It was the sound of the house. He had come in from the south fence just past midday, wrung out from the heat, and the house was alive. Not chaotic alive. Eli reciting letters, C is for Clara, and C is for Cookie, and C is for Caleb. Maddie's voice correcting him with patience. And C is for courage, which you have plenty of. And Clara, somewhere further back, making a sound that was emphatically not laughter, but was clearly a response to something funny. Caleb stopped just inside the door. He stood there and listened. He could not have said exactly what hit him. It was nothing dramatic. It was just sound. His house making sounds that meant people were alive in it, speaking to each other, passing through the small daily moments between tasks without the weight of total silence pressing down on all of it. He went back outside before anyone could see his face. He went to the water trough, worked the pump, and put his head under the cold water for a long moment. He came back up and stared at the flat brown horizon and breathed. He thought, Catherine. I don't know what this is. He thought the children are laughing in there. He went back inside and said nothing to anyone about any of it. On the 7th morning, the first visitor arrived. Her name was Doris Hale. She lived 3 miles east, and she had the sharp, watchful energy of a woman who collected information the way other people collected debts, carefully and with interest. She rode up in a buckboard with a jar of preserved plums she did not really need to deliver, and an expression that said the plums were not the point. Caleb was out at the barn. Maddie opened the door. Doris Hale looked at her. The look went all the way down and all the way back up, slow and deliberate enough to make certain Maddie felt every inch of it. You must be the woman Caleb took in, she said. I am the woman Caleb hired, Maddie said. Martha Bell. Would you like to come in out of the heat, Mrs. Hale? Doris Hale. She did not move from the step. I live just east. I wanted to bring these by for the children. She held out the jar, but did not let go of it immediately when Maddie reached for it. I also wanted to see for myself. See what, ma'am? Doris Hale's eyes moved past her into the kitchen, the clean counter, the bread on the shelf, the cup of wildflowers Eli had put on the table that morning. Something in her expression tightened. I have known Caleb Whitaker for 6 years, she said. He is a decent man in a hard situation. I would hate to see someone take advantage of that. Maddie looked at her steadily. So would I, she said. Doris Hale's jaw moved like she was working on a response to that. Before she landed on one, Caleb came around the side of the house with his hat in his hand and the look of a man who had spotted a situation developing. Doris, he said. Good of you to come by. I brought plums for the children. Her tone shifted instantly, warmer, easier. A different voice entirely than the one she had been using 30 seconds ago. I was just introducing myself to Miss Bell. She's good help, Caleb said simply. He looked at Maddie. Did Clara ask you about the south garden today? Not yet, Maddie said. Tell her to check the bean plants. Heat's been rough on them. I will. He put his hat back on and went back to work. Clean and simple. He had not apologized for Doris, or explained himself, or done any of the things that would have made Doris feel like she had accomplished something by coming. Doris Hale looked at the empty space where Caleb had been standing. Then she looked at Maddie. You have made yourself comfortable, she said. I have made myself useful, Maddie said. Those are different things. Thank you for the plums, Mrs. Hale. The children will appreciate them. She stepped back and closed the door. She stood in the kitchen for a moment after the sound of the buckboard faded. Then she went back to the beans. But Doris Hale talked. Of course she did. By the end of that week, the word moving through the county was specific and unkind. Caleb Whitaker had taken in a desperate fat woman from somewhere east with nowhere to go, and she had worked her way into his household through those poor motherless children, and anyone with eyes could see what she was angling for. Maddie heard it from the delivery boy on Thursday. He was 15, and he did not know she was on the other side of the corner when he set it to the mule while he unloaded the dry goods from his cart. She finished signing for the supplies. She thanked him. She walked around the back of the house and stood there with both hands pressed flat against the wall and breathed until the heat in her face had nothing to do with the July sun anymore. She had heard worse. She told herself that. She had sat in rooms where women looked through her like furniture, had been told to her face that her size was a moral failing, a character flaw, evidence of something broken that polite people did not need to specify. She had survived worse rooms and colder dismissals and sharper words, but she had not in a long time heard it in a place that had started to feel like somewhere she might belong. That was the difference. That was the thing that got in under the ribs where the other words had never reached. She pushed off the wall. She went back inside and started supper without saying a word to anyone. That evening she was rolling dough when Clara came and sat at the table uninvited. That alone was different. Clara did not sit in rooms with Maddie unless she was there for a purpose. She sat down, folded her hands on the tabletop, and watched with those gray eyes that never missed anything. "You heard something today?" Clara said. Maddie kept rolling. "What makes you say that?" "Because you've been hitting that dough for 20 minutes and it only needs 5. Maddie stopped. She set the rolling pin down. She looked at this 9-year-old girl who was currently reading her more accurately than most grown adults ever had. "I heard some gossip," Maddie said. "From town. About you. About me and your father and this household." "Yes." Clara's jaw set hard. "What did they say?" "Nothing worth repeating." "Was it about your size?" Maddie looked at her. Clara looked back, unflinching, like she had been waiting to ask that question since the day Maddie arrived and had only now decided the timing was right. "People in this town are mean," she said. "They always were. Even before Mama died, they talked about everything. About Papa when the ranch had a bad year, about Mama when she got sick, about me when I wore the same dress 2 weeks in a row because we didn't have money for a new one." She paused. "What they say doesn't make it true." Maddie was quiet for a long moment. "You know," she said carefully, "you are considerably wiser than 9-year-old Warrants." "Mama said the same thing," Clara said. "She said it like it wasn't entirely a compliment." Maddie almost laughed. "Your mother sounds like she was a very smart woman." "She was." Clara's voice went quiet for just a beat. Then her chin came back up. "You're not her." "No, but you're not nothing either." It came out halting and effortful, like the words had to fight their way through several layers of pride to reach the open air. "I want you to know that I know that, even if I don't say it all the time." Maddie picked up the rolling pin and started again. "That," she said, "is about the most generous thing anyone has said to me in 6 months. I am going to treat it accordingly." She glanced sideways. "Go get your brother. Supper in 20 minutes." Clara stood. She was almost to the door when she stopped with her hand on the frame. "Maddie." "If they say things in town—" She stopped. Tried again. "You don't have to just stand there and take it." Maddie looked up. Clara's back was still to her, her shoulders pulled up high and tight. "Neither do you," Maddie said. Clara left without another word. Maddie stood alone in the kitchen and held that exchange for a moment, turned it over, set it somewhere safe. It was Caleb who caught her off guard. Not with kindness, she had begun to expect a certain quiet consideration from him. The way he moved his schedule to be at the ranch more hours each day. The way water was always drawn before she needed to ask for it. She had categorized those things as practical. A man keeping his household arrangement running smoothly. She did not let herself read them as more. What caught her off guard was the night she was on the porch after the children were in bed, sitting with her mending in her lap and the needle going in and out by feel in the thin evening light, and he came and sat in the other chair without asking and without saying a word. They sat in silence for a while. The silence was not uncomfortable. That was the part that unsettled her. It should have been a man and a woman not married, sitting alone in the dark, saying nothing. But it felt instead like the silence of two people too tired for performance who had simply stopped pretending to be anything other than what they were. "The Hale woman came by," he said finally. "I know. She came to the door." "I know she did." He was quiet a moment. "I'm sorry she spoke to you the way she likely did." "You don't know what she said." "I know Doris Hale," he said. "I know what she does with new information. I should have been there." Maddie kept her needle moving. "I am not a child who needs someone standing at the door behind me, Mr. Whitaker." "No," he said. "You're not." He said it like it was the end of something rather than the beginning. Another stretch of quiet. The windmill turned slow overhead. "Why'd you really stop?" he said. "At this house." Maddie looked up from her mending. I told you why, she said. You told me about Eli crying. He kept his eyes on the dark, flat horizon. That's true. But you walked 6 days through open country and passed through 3 towns before you got here. There were children in those towns, people in need. You kept walking. Maddie put her needle through the cloth and held it there. Yes, she said. So why here? She thought about how to say it. She thought about the specific quality of Eli's crying that she had heard from the road, not a child wanting something, but a child who had already given up on being answered. She thought about the door swinging open when she touched it, unlatched, like the house itself had given up on being kept. Some doors are just open, she said, and some people need someone to walk through. Caleb looked at her. In the thin, dark light, she could not read his expression fully, but she felt the weight of his attention, the way you feel sun through thin cloth, diffuse and warm and impossible to ignore. The children are better, he said, since you came. They were always good children, she said. They just needed feeding. More than food, he said. She looked back at her mending. Go to bed, Mr. Whitaker. Long day tomorrow. He sat a moment longer. Then he stood and picked up his hat from the railing. Caleb, he said. She looked up. My name is Caleb, he said. You've been here 9 days. He went inside. Maddie sat alone on the porch with her needle in the cloth and her heart doing something it had no business doing, and she made herself finish the seam before she moved. But the town did not stop talking. What Maddie did not know, what she would not discover until much later, was that the gossip had not started with Doris Hale. It had started the day after she left Meridian, when a woman named Ruth Pritchard sat down at her writing desk and dipped her pen. Ruth Pritchard ran the Ladies' Charitable Society of Mill Haven and considered herself the primary moral authority of 4 counties in every direction. She was a widow herself, respectable, narrow church-going, and possessed of the particular cruelty of a person who has decided that suffering is noble only when it produces the correct kind of suffering in the correct kind of person. She had known Catherine Whitaker. She had brought food to this ranch when Catherine was sick, and she had worn that act of charity ever since like a ribbon pinned to her chest. When word reached her that Caleb had taken in a large, unmarried woman from out of county with no family and no prospects, Ruth Pritchard had opinions. She had a great many opinions. She put them all in letters. By the 2nd week of Maddie's time at the Whitaker Ranch, there was not a household within 15 miles that had not received word directly or indirectly that Caleb Whitaker was being taken advantage of by a desperate woman of unsound character, who had used 2 small children as leverage to install herself in a decent man's home. The word desperate did a lot of work in Ruth Pritchard's vocabulary. It was her preferred weapon. It carried just enough truth to make everything around it go down easy. Maddie heard another version of it on Friday when she went to the dry goods store for flour and salt. The woman behind the counter served her without speaking. When Maddie put her coins down, the woman slid one of them back and said flatly, "We don't extend credit to boarders." Maddie looked at the coin. "I am not asking for credit," she said evenly. "That is payment in full." Mrs. Pritchard says Caleb Whitaker doesn't know what kind of woman he's dealing with. Maddie picked up her flour. She picked up her salt. "Then I suggest Mrs. Pritchard come out and find out for herself," she said. "Good day." She walked out. She did not hurry. She walked to the wagon with her back straight and her chin level, and she loaded her goods and climbed up on the seat and did not let her hands shake on the reins until she had turned the corner and was out of sight of the store window. Then she sat there in the full blazing July heat, and she thought about how far west she had originally meant to go. She thought about the road that was still out there, still going, still leading somewhere that was not here. She thought about Eli calling out letters in flour on the tabletop. She thought about Clara's biscuits rising straight and clean from the pan. She thought about a man who had told her his first name at the edge of dark, like it was something worth offering. She picked up the reins. She drove back to the ranch. She walked in the door to find Eli at the table with his letters, and Clara at the stove with 2 spoons and a pot of something that smelled like it might actually work out. "I am making soup," Clara announced without turning around. Her voice carried the particular aggression of someone declaring a thing they are not entirely sure they can pull off. "I see that," Maddie said. She hung up her hat. "How much salt?" "A little." "How little?" A pause. "Maybe a medium little." Maddie came and stood beside her and tasted the spoon Clara held out with only moderate reluctance. "Start with the potatoes next time," Maddie said. "Let them go soft before you add anything else. Salt has something to cling to that way." She tasted again. "It's going to be good, Clara." Clara turned away to stir the pot, and her back straightened just slightly in the way of a person receiving praise they were not willing to be seen wanting. "I know," Clara said. Maddie pulled up a stool beside Eli and helped him with his letters, and did not say one word about what had happened in town. Not yet. Some things needed to be carried alone for a while before they could be set down. That night, after the children were asleep and the house had gone dark and still, Maddie stood in the kitchen with the lamp turned low and found the letter sitting on the counter. It was addressed to Caleb Whitaker in handwriting that slanted hard to the right, the handwriting of a woman who pressed too hard on everything. It had been opened already. It had been placed where she would see it. She had not meant to read it. But her own name was in the first line. And you do not put down a letter that opens with your own name. Ruth Pritchard had written 3 paragraphs. The third one she read twice. "I write to you as someone who knew and loved your dear Catherine, and who prays for the welfare of your children. A woman who cannot secure her own respectability should not be trusted with the respectability of others. I know something of Miss Bell's history in Lampasas County that you should be made aware of before you allow this arrangement to continue. Please call on me at your earliest convenience, and I will tell you what I know." Maddie set the letter down. She stood in the low lamplight, and she thought about Lampasas County. She thought about who in Lampasas County Ruth Pritchard could possibly know. She thought about whether it even mattered what this woman claimed to know, because whatever it was, it would be framed just right and delivered in the right parlor, and it would do exactly what it was designed to do. It would close this door, the same way every other door had been closed. She heard Caleb's boots in the hallway. She did not move. She did not reach for the letter because it was his letter and she had no right to hide it. He came into the kitchen. He saw her at the table. He saw the letter in front of her. He looked at it for a moment. "I left it there on purpose," he said. Maddie looked up. "I wanted you to read it," he said, "because I am going to ask you something, and I wanted you to know what I already know before I asked it." She waited. Caleb crossed the kitchen and stood on the other side of the table. He did not sit. He put both hands flat on the tabletop and looked at her straight on the way he had looked at her over the rifle barrel on that first night direct, without flinching, nothing hidden behind it. "Is there anything in Lampasas County I need to know about?" he said. Maddie met his eyes and held them. "My husband died in debt," she said. "He borrowed money from a man in town without telling me, and when he died, that man came to collect from me what my husband could not pay. I didn't have it. He made sure everyone in Lampasas County knew I didn't have it. He told people I had spent it. He told people I was dishonest." She paused. "I was not. But the story that travels faster is always the one people already want to believe." Caleb was very still. "Is that all of it?" he said. "That is all of it." He picked up the letter. He folded it once. He held it over the lamp flame until the corner caught, and the fire ran up the paper clean and bright. He set it in the ash pan on the stove and watched it finish. "All right," he said. Maddie stared at him. He picked up his lamp. "Get some sleep," he said. "South fence needs looking at in the morning. Could use help with the supply count if you're willing." He walked out of the kitchen. Maddie stood in the dark and looked at the ash in the pan. She had spent 9 days waiting for the door to close, waiting for the moment when he would look at her the way every other person had eventually looked at her, with that particular calculation of cost versus benefit, deciding she was more trouble than she was worth. She had not considered what it would mean when a man chose instead to burn the thing that was holding the door shut. She blew out her lamp. She went to her room. She lay on the cot in the summer dark, listening to the windmill and the dry heat breathing through the walls, and she thought, "This is dangerous. This is becoming something I do not know how to manage." She thought, "I do not know how to stop it." She thought, "I am not sure anymore that I want to." Outside past the barn, a night bird called once and went still. The house settled around her, and somewhere down the hall, two children slept without hunger, for the 9th night in a row, and Martha Bell lay awake in the dark and felt for the first time in 3 years the specific terror of a woman who has stopped running long enough to realize she has found somewhere worth staying. The morning Caleb asked her to come to the church picnic, Maddie said no. She said it quietly, without drama, the way she said most things, directly and without apology. She was at the stove, and she did not turn around when she said it. "It is not a good idea," she said. "Why not?" Caleb was at the table with his coffee. "It will cause talk." "Talk is already happening," he said. "Has been since the 2nd day." "Then there's no reason to hand them more." Caleb set his cup down. "The children want to go. Eli's been asking about the lemonade stand every morning since I mentioned it. Clara won't say so, but she wants to go too." "Then take them," Maddie said. "I'll stay and mind the house." A short silence. "I want you to come," Caleb said. She turned around then. He was looking at her in that direct way of his, no performance, no maneuvering, just a man saying a plain thing and waiting to see what she did with it. "Caleb," she said. His name still felt new in her mouth, like something she had not yet earned the full right to. "If we walk into that picnic together, they will not see a rancher and his hired help. They will decide what they are looking at before we get through the gate." "I expect they will," he said. "Come anyway." She held his gaze for a long moment. "All right," she said. She turned back to the stove. She was not entirely sure afterward whether she had agreed because he had asked her plainly, or because some bone-tired part of her that had walked 6 days and heard every version of the same insult was sick of being afraid. Maybe both. She did not untangle it. Clara was the one who came to her room that morning. A single knock. Clara's knock, always exactly one, measured out to the precise minimum required by social contract. Maddie told her to come in. Clara stood in the doorway in her good blue dress, with her hands folded and her chin at its customary angle of controlled dignity. "Wear the gray dress," Clara said, "not the brown one." Maddie looked at her in the small mirror. "The gray one's better fabric," she said carefully. "I know that." Clara's eyes moved to the dress on the hook. "The brown one makes you look like you're trying to disappear. The gray one doesn't." A pause. "You shouldn't look like you're trying to disappear. Not today." Maddie held very still. "All right," she said. "The gray one." Clara nodded once and turned to go. "Clara." She stopped. "Thank you," Maddie said. Clara's chin came up a fraction. "I just don't want people thinking we can't dress properly," she said, and walked out. Maddie turned back to the mirror and finished her braid and did not say one word to herself about what had just happened. But her hands were steadier than they had been all morning. When the Whitaker wagon rolled up to the church field, and Caleb climbed down and lifted Eli to the ground, and Clara jumped down on her own, the way she always did, and then Maddie climbed down after the talking that had been going on about this household went very quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then it continued at a lower, more deliberate register. Maddie felt it the way you feel weather coming in a pressure shift in the air before the thing itself arrives. She kept her face even. She put her hand briefly on Eli's shoulder and followed Caleb through the gate. The first 20 minutes were almost manageable. People spoke to Caleb. They greeted Clara with the mechanical warmth adults use on children they do not know how to handle. They did not speak to Maddie. They looked at her the way people look at something they have already formed an opinion about and are now simply confirming. Eli did not notice any of it. He had spotted the lemonade stand and was pulling at Caleb's hand with single-minded purpose. "Go ahead," Maddie said to Caleb. "Come with us," Eli said, reaching for her hand at the same moment. She let him take it. The three of them, Caleb, Eli, and Maddie walked to the lemonade stand with Eli between them, holding both their hands, and she felt the weight of every pair of eyes in that field, making note of the configuration. Clara walked 3 steps behind them, which was either coincidence or the most deliberate act of observation Maddie had ever witnessed from a 9-year-old. She suspected the latter. It was while Eli was working his way through his first glass of lemonade with the concentration of a child who had been thinking about this moment for a solid week that Ruth Pritchard arrived. Maddie knew who she was before anyone said her name. She had that particular bearing erect, unhurried. The bearing of a woman who has never once in her life walked into a space where she did not feel she owned the center of it. She was accompanied by 2 women who had the same pressed, watchful quality, like dried flowers flattened too far under glass. Ruth Pritchard stopped 6 feet from where Maddie stood. "Caleb," she said warmly, as though Maddie were a fixture rather than a person. "How wonderful to see you out. And the children." She looked at Clara and Eli with the specific sweetness of someone performing generosity at a distance. "Your mother would be so pleased to see how fine you both look." Clara's jaw tightened. "Thank you, Mrs. Pritchard," she said in her church voice, flat and correct and revealing nothing. Ruth Pritchard's eyes moved to Maddie. Slowly. "The way you move your gaze to the thing you intended to get to all along." "And this must be your arrangement," she said. The word sat in the air between them like something placed there on purpose. Caleb opened his mouth. "Martha Bell," Maddie said before he could draw breath. "You must be Mrs. Pritchard. I believe I've received a letter of yours secondhand." A ripple went through the 2 women behind Ruth. Ruth herself did not flinch, but something in her expression shifted and reset. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "I think you do," Maddie said pleasantly. "But it isn't important. It's a fine day for a picnic." Ruth Pritchard looked at her for a long moment. Then she did what women like her always do when the expected reaction does not arrive. She shifted her angle. "I only worry," she said loudly enough now that the nearest groups could hear without trying, "about Caleb's household. He is a man of good standing who has been through tremendous grief. It would be a shame if his judgment were compromised by a difficult situation." "His judgment seems fine to me," Maddie said. "Well." Ruth's eyes traveled down the gray dress and back up unhurried, the same measuring look Doris Hale had used 3 weeks ago. "You would be the last one to see it clearly, wouldn't you? A man in need doesn't always choose wisely. He chooses what is in front of him." She paused, and her voice took on the edge of something that had been sharpened carefully and carried a long way. "What he needs is a proper wife, not a cook who ate half her own kitchen." The silence that came down was absolute. Eli stopped drinking his lemonade. Clara's head came up. Every person within 20 feet had heard it. Every single one. Not one of them made a sound. Maddie felt it go through her cold, even in the July heat. The old familiar thing, the one she had carried since she was a girl too big for her age, in a family that did not have room for her. The specific shame of being looked at as though your body is a confession you owe the world. She felt her throat tighten and her face heat, and the years-long instinct move through her. Shrink, apologize, become smaller and quieter and less. Until you take up exactly the amount of space they have decided is acceptable. Then she felt Clara's hand find hers. She looked down. Clara was not looking at her. She was looking at Ruth Pritchard with her gray eyes wide open and her chin up and her grip around Maddie's fingers, saying one thing with complete clarity: "I am right here. Don't you move." Something shifted inside Maddie's chest, deep and final, the way things shift when they are done shifting. She looked back at Ruth Pritchard. She took 1 step forward. "I have been called ugly," Maddie said. Her voice was quiet, and it carried every inch of those 6 walking days inside it. "I have been called greedy, lazy, too big, too plain, too much woman for any decent room. I have heard that speech in 4 counties and 2 states. Mrs. Pritchard and I am going to tell you something I should have said the first time someone decided my body was something they had the right to comment on." Ruth Pritchard's chin rose. "Now really, my body," Maddie said, "is not a reflection of my character. It is not an apology or a warning or a thing that belongs to your opinion. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I have never once sat across a table from a hungry child and thought I should stop feeding them because someone might not like the look of me. I have never left a task undone because I was too busy being ashamed of my own skin. She stopped, breathed once. I am not ashamed. She said the last 3 words the way you drive a nail, once clean all the way through. Ruth Pritchard looked at her. She looked at Caleb. She looked at Clara, who was still holding Maddie's hand and making no effort whatsoever to pretend otherwise. Caleb stepped forward. He did not make a speech. He was not a man who made speeches. He simply moved until he was standing beside Maddie, not in front of her, not between her and Ruth, but beside her. And he put his hat back on and looked at Ruth Pritchard with the expression of a man who has finished deliberating. "Ruth," he said, "Catherine liked you. I always respected that about her. I'm asking you now for her sake, and for the sake of what's right, to leave this alone." Ruth's mouth opened, closed. "Caleb?" One of the women behind her started. "I'm not finished." His voice was still low, still even, carrying everything underneath without letting it spill. "This woman came into my house when my children hadn't eaten properly in 2 days, and I was too stretched and too proud and too exhausted to see what was happening under my own roof. She didn't ask for anything, she just fed them." He paused. "People who only watched my family fall apart don't get to tell me who belongs in it. Not a sound from the field, not even wind." Eli had moved from the lemonade stand and was now pressed against Maddie's side, his back to her hip, watching the adults with the expression of a child who understands considerably more than the adults around him think he does. Clara had not let go. Ruth Pritchard looked at the 4 of them. Maddie, Caleb, the 2 children arranged around her like something that had decided collectively, and without a vote, that it was a unit, and whatever she had crossed the field intending to accomplish was gone. She was a woman who knew when a room had turned, even when the room was a July field in full sun. "I'm sure you know your own mind, Caleb," she said with great and carefully assembled dignity. She turned and walked away. Her 2 companions went with her. Around the field, conversation started back up slowly, the way water finds its level after being disturbed. People looked elsewhere. Someone laughed at something that had nothing to do with any of them. The afternoon folded the moment back into its ordinary fabric and kept going. Eli looked up at Maddie. "She was not very nice," he said. "No." Maddie agreed. "Are you all right?" She looked down at this little boy who had pressed himself against her side without being told who was looking up at her with his father's eyes full of the most uncomplicated concern she had received from another person in longer than she wanted to think about. "I am all right," she said. "Thank you for asking." He nodded satisfied and reached back for his lemonade. Clara, still holding her hand, said nothing for a long moment. Then very quietly she said, "Good." Just that word. But she said it like it was carrying considerably more than one word could hold. Caleb looked at Maddie. His voice had dropped back to its everyday register, low and direct, the voice he used when he was not performing for anyone. "You all right?" he said. "I will be," she said. He looked at her in that way of his that saw more than he put into words. Then he nodded once and turned to find someone about chairs, and life resumed its ordinary shape around them. But something had happened. Something had been said in the open that could not be unsaid, and everyone present knew it. And somewhere behind Ruth Pritchard's retreating back, Ruth Pritchard knew it too. The afternoon passed in the way of summer afternoons that carry more weight than their hours account for. Eli won a foot race. Clara ate 2 pieces of pie without being asked permission. A neighbor woman, whose name Maddie did not know, came over, shook her hand firmly, said, "That took courage," and walked away before Maddie could respond. Caleb did not leave her side for more than 10 minutes at a stretch. He did not make a production of it. He simply happened to always be within arm's reach. On the wagon ride home, Eli fell asleep across the seat with his head in Maddie's lap within the first mile. Clara sat up front beside her father and watched the road without speaking. The silence among the four of them was the same kind as the porch had been, the kind that did not require filling, the kind that had weight and warmth and something living inside it. It should have been the best evening. By any honest measure, it should have been enough. Maddie had stood in the open and spoken and had not been destroyed by it. She had said, "I am not ashamed," in a field full of people who expected her to crumble. Caleb had stood beside her without being asked. Clara had held her hand in plain sight of everyone. Eli had pressed himself to her side the way children do things they do not think twice about. It should have been enough. But Maddie Bell had spent 3 years learning slowly and completely that the things which felt like enough were precisely the things that got taken. And she lay awake that night listening to the house breathe and the windmill turn, and the more awake she was, the louder the fear got. You have no deed here, no family, no standing, no claim. You are a hired woman in a borrowed room in a house that belongs to someone else's grief. Today was one afternoon. Caleb stood beside you in public, and the whole county saw it. And tomorrow, Ruth Pritchard will be writing another letter, and another after that. And what happens when it costs him too much? What happens when the ranch suffers for the talk? What happens when he looks at you one morning and the arithmetic no longer adds up? And underneath that thought, quieter and more dangerous, what happens when you let yourself want this, and then it is gone? What happens when you love something and then you lose it? She had lost a husband. She knew what that loss felt like from the inside. Not the grief of great love, because she and Robert had been practical more than passionate, but the specific devastation of having something and then having nothing. Of going to sleep one night as a woman with a household, and waking up the next morning as a woman the world had no clear category for. She could not do that again. Better to leave before it became something she could not leave. Better to go now, while the children's attachment was young enough to redirect, while Caleb was still a widower who needed help and not a man she had started to. She sat up. She swung her legs off the cot. She pulled her bag from under the bed. She packed the way she had packed 6 weeks ago, leaving Meridian quickly with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had moved enough times to know what mattered and what could be left behind. The dress. The mending kit. The small tin with her wages. Her mother's Bible. She did not let herself think about Eli's letters and the flower. She did not let herself think about Clara's biscuits or the porch or the specific way Caleb said her name, Maddie, quietly like it was worth the air it cost. She buckled the bag. She set it by the door. She sat back down on the cot and looked at her hands in the dark. In the morning, I will leave a note. I will thank him properly. I will say the children are in good shape now and don't need me the way they did. A lie, probably, but a survivable one. She heard the door. Not the outside door, the hallway door. Clara's door down the hall, which opened with a particular small sound Maddie had learned to recognize in 6 weeks, the way you learn the sounds of a house you are starting to think of as your own. Bare feet on the floorboards, unhurried. Clara appeared in the doorway of the storeroom. She looked at Maddie. She looked at the bag by the door. For one long moment, she did not say anything. Then, "Where are you going?" Not a question, a demand wearing a question's punctuation. "Clara, it is the middle of the night," Clara said. "It is the middle of the night after the best day we have had since Mama died, and you are sitting in the dark with your bag packed." She stepped into the room. She was in her nightgown, her feet bare, her braid half undone from sleep, and she was furious in the way of a child who is not quite there yet, but is moving toward it fast. "Why?" "I think it's better if I—" "Don't." Clara's voice cut clean. "Don't tell me it's better. Don't tell me you'll find good work somewhere else, or that we'll be fine." Her voice sharpened at the edges. "We were not fine. We were not fine before you came, and you know that." "You will be," Maddie said. "You are stronger than you think." "I know how strong I am." Clara stepped closer. Her voice cracked at the end, and she pulled it back hard before it could break all the way. "That is not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" "It's about you," Clara said. "You stood in a field today and said, 'I am not ashamed,' in front of everyone in this county. And then you came home and packed your bag in the dark because you are ashamed, because you think you don't deserve to stay. Her chin was trembling now. She had both hands balled at her sides, and she was fighting hard to stay in anger rather than fall into something worse. You think if you leave first, it won't hurt as much when it ends. Maddie looked at her. 9 years old. Standing in a borrowed room in the middle of a July night, taking apart Maddie's whole internal architecture with both hands and laying it out plainly. Clara. My mother didn't leave on purpose, Clara said. The words came out strained, pressed through something tight and narrow. She died. She didn't choose to go. She would have stayed if she could. She would have... She stopped. Her throat moved. You are choosing. Right now you are choosing to walk out that door, and I need you to understand what that means. Maddie could not speak. If you leave, Clara said, and her voice had dropped to something so quiet it barely carried across the room. Then they were right. All those women in that field today were right. Mrs. Pritchard was right. Everyone who ever told you that you don't belong was right. Because you left. She took one more step toward her. And it means that people like us, people who aren't pretty enough or rich enough or the right kind of anything, it means we don't get to keep anyone. It means nobody stays for us, ever. The room was absolutely still. Maddie's hands were in her lap and she could feel them shaking, and she did not try to stop it. People like us, she said softly. You said people like us. Clara looked at her steadily. Her eyes were wet now finally, but her chin was still up. I am a girl whose mother died and whose father can't always keep the lights on, and whose dress is the same one 2 weeks running, she said. And you are... She stopped, started again. You are someone nobody wanted. Because that is what they made you believe. Because they kept saying it until it sounded like truth. She pressed her lips together until they went white. But Eli wants you. And I... Another stop. Harder. Costlier. I don't not want you. Maddie pressed one hand over her mouth. Clara looked at the bag by the door. She looked back at Maddie. Don't go, she said. Just that. Direct and plain the way she said everything that mattered to her. Don't go because you're scared. That is the only reason you're going, and it is not good enough. The windmill turned outside. Down the hall, Eli made a small sleeping sound and went quiet. Maddie looked at the bag. She looked at Clara, this girl, who had stood in a doorway 6 weeks ago with a kitchen knife and her feet planted. This girl who ate biscuits at the counter with her back turned so no one could see her face. This girl who had told her she was not nothing like it was the most significant compliment in her vocabulary, which it probably was. This girl who was standing in the dark right now telling her the truth so plainly it had no room left to be argued with. Clara, Maddie said. Her voice came out raw. You cannot promise me this works out. No, Clara said. I can't. She did not look away from it. But I can promise that right now tonight Eli is asleep down that hall because you fed him. And Papa... She stopped and pushed through it. He looks at you different. He has been looking at you different for weeks. I don't know what that is yet, but I know it wasn't there before you came. She squared her thin shoulders in her nightgown. You asked that door for one night, and you got 6 weeks. Maybe that's how it works. Maybe you just keep asking for one more night until one night it doesn't need asking anymore. The room held its breath. Maddie looked at this girl, this furious, grieving 9 years old and already ancient girl who had just offered her the bravest piece of hope she had heard from another human being in 3 years. She reached out. She put her hand against Clara's face gently, the way you touch something you are afraid of breaking, and Clara went absolutely still and let her. You should be in bed, Maddie said. I know, Clara said. She did not move. Go to bed, Clara. Clara's eyes dropped to the bag by the door. Maddie stood up. She picked up the bag. She put it back under the cot. She set it down and heard it meet the floor, and she left it there. She looked at Clara. Go to bed, she said again, softer. Clara looked at the place under the cot where the bag had gone. She looked at Maddie's face. She pressed her lips together and gave one single nod, small final enough, and turned and walked back down the hall on her bare feet without another word. The door closed. Maddie sat back down on the cot. She put her face in her hands and stayed there for a long time, breathing in and out in the dark, feeling the shape of what she had almost done, and the shape of what Clara had said, and the space between them where a choice had been made without a single declaration she could point to later. She had asked for one night. She had gotten 6 weeks. Maybe that was how it worked. She lay back down. She pulled the blanket up. She did not sleep for a long time, but she stayed. She stayed, and the house stayed around her, and the windmill kept turning, and eventually slowly the fear loosened its grip just enough to let the exhaustion in, and Martha Bell closed her eyes in the dark and held on to the only thing she had left that was worth holding. Outside, the summer night stretched wide and warm and full of stars. In the house, 3 people slept, and 1 woman stayed. The morning after the picnic, Maddie was at the stove when Caleb said it. "I heard Clara get up last night." Maddie's hand went still on the spoon. "She gets up sometimes," Maddie said. "Checks on Eli. Not last night." He kept his eyes on his cup. "I heard her go down the hall. I heard her knock on your door. I heard her go in." He paused. "I was awake. I stayed in my room. That wasn't my conversation to be part of." He set the cup down. "But I heard her go in, and I heard her come back out, and I heard you stay." The kitchen held its breath. "You could have come yourself," Maddie said. "Yes," he said. "I could have." He looked at her directly the way he always did, nothing deflected. "But I needed to know if you'd stay because you chose to. Not because I showed up at your door and made leaving feel wrong. Not because I asked." He picked the cup back up. "I needed it to be yours." Maddie looked at him across the table. This man. This careful, quiet, bone-tired man who had spent the dark hours of last night figuring out that the most important thing he could give her was the right to make the choice herself. "You could have just asked me to stay," she said. "I did," he said. "At the picnic. And you said all right. And then you almost didn't." No accusation in it, just fact. "I didn't want almost. I wanted sure." Maddie set the wooden spoon down. She turned around fully and looked at him. "I am not sure," she said. "I want to be honest about that. I am scared every morning I wake up in this house. I am scared I want things I have no right to want, and that caring about your children is going to break me in ways I can't see yet, and that this is going to end in a way I won't survive." She stopped. "I am not sure, but I am here, and I am going to keep being here. That is the most honest thing I have." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "That's enough," he said. "Is it? For now it is." She turned back to the stove. She heard him exhale long and slow and quiet like a man who has been carrying something heavy and has just found a place to set it down. Neither of them said another word about it. They did not need to. 3 days passed. Maddie worked. The ranch worked. Eli kept learning his letters and had now moved from flour to a small slate Caleb had found at the bottom of a crate and cleaned off without ceremony. Clara had started asking questions about bread, not baking questions. Recipe questions, the kind a person asks when they are building something in their mind and want to get the architecture right. Maddie answered each one as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world for a 9-year-old to want to know the difference between bread flour and meal flour, and why you proof yeast in warm water and not cold. On the 4th morning, Clara burned herself. Not badly, just the edge of her palm against the panhandle. The kind of burn that stings sharp and fast, and is over before you have time to be properly frightened by it. But Clara made no sound. She pulled her hand back and pressed it against her side and set her jaw. "Let me see it," Maddie said. "I'm fine." "Clara?" "I said I'm fine." Maddie walked over, took Clara's wrist gently, not a request exactly, and turned her hand over. The red line across the base of her palm was small. Maddie pressed a cool cloth against it without asking permission. Clara did not pull away. "You should have said something," Maddie said. "I didn't want to make a fuss." Making a fuss is allowed when you're in pain. Clara looked at the cloth on her hand. She said very quietly, barely a sound at all, "Mama used to say that too." Maddie kept the cloth in place and did not say a single word, and let the silence do what silence does when words would only get in the way. Clara's throat moved. She looked at the pan. "I'm going to try it again," she said. "I know you are," Maddie said. "But let that hand rest a minute first." Clara sat down. She sat there with the cloth on her palm and looked at the stove with the expression of someone who has already decided the outcome of a fight they have not yet had. "May Maddie," she said. She stopped. The word had come out of its own accord without permission, the way things do when a person has been quietly thinking something for long enough that it finally slips through the gate. Clara's face went absolutely still. Maddie's chest did something large and complicated that she kept entirely off her face. "What?" Maddie said calmly. Clara looked at the cloth on her hand. "Nothing." Her voice was careful now, every syllable managed. "I was going to ask if the cloth should stay on longer." "Another minute?" Maddie said. "Then you can try the pan again." Clara nodded. She did not correct herself. She did not say, "I meant to say Miss Bell," or "I don't know why I said that." She said nothing at all, and Maddie said nothing at all, and the name sat between them in the kitchen like something new and living and too fragile to be looked at directly. It was 2 days later that Maddie noticed the posts. She had gone out to pull water in the morning and found Caleb at the far end of the porch with a post hole digger and 2 fresh-cut lengths of timber working in the early heat before the day got properly brutal. She stood at the corner of the porch and watched him for a moment. "What are you building?" she said. "Shade extension," he said, not stopping. "For what?" "For the west side of the porch." He drove the digger down. "Gets no shade past noon. Heat comes straight across in the afternoon. Makes the porch unusable." Maddie looked at the west side of the porch. She thought about every afternoon she had spent inside the house when the heat got past bearable, and about the one time she had said once casually, not a complaint, that the afternoon sun off the west wall came in like the inside of a Dutch oven. He had heard that. He had heard it, and he had gone out and gotten timber and was now digging post holes at first light to fix it. "Caleb," she said. You do not have to do that." "I know I don't." He drove the digger down again. "Hand me that level when you get a chance." She picked up the level and handed it to him. She went to get the water. She did not trust her face right then. She did not trust what she would say if she turned around and looked at him, doing that simple, practical, entirely deliberate thing in the early morning heat. So she went to get the water, and she carried it back, and she started the fire in the stove, and she let herself feel it privately where it belonged. The shaded porch took him 3 days to finish. He worked on it in the mornings before the day's work, and in the evenings after the children were in bed, and he did not make a speech about it, or explain himself further, or ask her once how it was coming along. He just built it. On the day he finished, Maddie went out in the afternoon and sat in the new shade with her mending and the breeze that moved through the extended porch, and Eli came and sat beside her and leaned against her arm and went to sleep, and she sat there in the cool shadow and let the afternoon pass in a way the afternoon had not been allowed to pass in weeks. She heard the screen door. Caleb came out and sat in the other chair and said nothing. They sat. After a while he said, "Better, much better," she said. "Good." That was all. But it was not all, and they both knew it was not all. Some things do not need saying because they are already completely said. The blue fabric arrived on a Thursday. Maddie had been in the dry goods store in Millhaven 4 weeks prior, the same trip where the woman behind the counter had pushed her coin back, and on the way out she had stopped at a bolt of cloth near the window. Blue cotton, good quality, the particular shade of blue that sits between sky and water and does not commit to either. She had touched it. Just the edge of it, just her fingertips 1 second. Then she had let go of it and walked out because spending money on herself was something she had not done in 3 years and did not know how to start. She had not mentioned it to anyone. Caleb came in on Thursday afternoon with a parcel wrapped in brown paper and set it on the table without explanation. "What is that?" she said. "Open it," he said. She unwrapped it. The blue fabric unfolded in her hands, 3 yards of it, the exact shade from the window in town. She looked at it. She looked at him. "How did you know which one?" she said. "I asked the woman at the store," he said. "I said which bolt was near the window on the east side and which color a woman had stopped at in the last month." He picked up his hat from the table. She knew right away. He put the hat on. "Make yourself something you won't wear to cook in." He went back outside. Maddie stood at the kitchen table with 3 yards of blue cotton in her hands and felt something so large and quiet move through her chest that she had to stand still for a moment and let it pass before she could move again. Clara appeared in the doorway. She looked at the fabric. She looked at the direction Caleb had gone. "Pa did that," she said. "He did," Maddie said. Clara looked at the fabric again. Something moved through her expression, not surprise exactly, more like confirmation. "He doesn't do things like that," Clara said. "He hasn't done anything like that since." She stopped. "I know," Maddie said. Clara looked at her. "Don't make him regret it," she said. It came out hard, like something that had been waiting. But underneath the hardness was the other thing, the fear, the real thing, the thing Clara wore her hardness over like armor over a wound. "I will do everything in my power not to," Maddie said. Clara looked at her for a long moment. Something settled in her face, not entirely, not all the way, but enough. "Good," she said, and went back to what she had been doing. Eli, for his part, had stopped being complicated about any of it. Eli had made up his mind somewhere in the first week and had not reconsidered it since. He called her Maddie, the way he called everything by its name, cleanly and without ceremony, and he brought her things. He found interesting a particular rock, a feather once, a small brown toad he had decided she would want to see, which she had examined with complete seriousness, and then set free in the garden at his direction. He came to her one afternoon while she was working on the blue dress at the kitchen table and climbed up on his stool beside her and watched her hands for a while. "Maddie," he said. When I was little," he stopped. "You are still little," she said. "I know. But when I was littler, before Mama got sick." He traced a seam on the table with one finger. "I used to go to the kitchen when I had bad dreams, because Mama was always there, or I thought she might be there." He paused. "Now when I have bad dreams, I come to the kitchen, and you are always there." Maddie's needle stopped. "Does that bother you?" she said carefully. "No." He looked up at her with his father's honest eyes. "It's just, I think maybe home isn't a place. I think home is the person who's in it." He looked back at the seam. "You're home," he said simply. "That's what I think." Maddie put her needle down. She looked at this 5-year-old boy who had just said in 11 words what she had been trying to find the shape of for her entire adult life. "Eli," she said. "Thank you. You're welcome," he said, and slid off the stool to go find his slate. It was the following week that Ruth Pritchard made her last move. She did not come herself. She sent a man, Hector Webb, who ran the county clerk's office and fancied himself a figure of some authority, with a letter for Caleb. Maddie saw the man ride up while she was at the well and called out for Caleb. But Caleb was at the south fence, a 20-minute ride. Clara came to the door instead. Maddie watched from a distance as Hector Webb made the mistake of looking over Clara's head into the house, rather than at her while he explained what he had come for. She watched Clara's chin go up. She could not hear the words from where she stood, but she could read the conversation in the posture of it. Hector Webb talking, then starting to talk again, then stopping mid-sentence. He handed Clara the letter. Clara looked at it. She looked up at him. She said something, short and flat and final. Hector Webb put his hat back on, turned his horse around, and rode back the way he had come. Clara came over to the well with the letter in her hand. "What did he want?" Maddie said. "He said Mrs. Pritchard has taken her concerns about this household to the county judge. She says, Clara looked at the letter, then back up at Maddie. She says an unmarried woman living in an unmarried man's household is an improper arrangement, and if Papa doesn't regularize the situation, she intends to involve the church committee. Maddie looked at the letter. "And what did you say to him?" she said. Clara folded the letter in half. "I told him that my father is fully aware of the situation in this household and makes his own decisions about it, and that Mrs. Pritchard's opinions about our family are not something we require, and not something we intend to collect." She handed the letter to Maddie. "I also told him that if Mrs. Pritchard comes here herself, I will be the one to answer the door." Maddie looked at this 9-year-old girl. "Clara Whitaker," she said. "I know," Clara said, already walking back to the house. Maddie stood at the well with the letter in her hand and thought, "Catherine, you raised something remarkable." She thought it, and she meant it, and she folded the letter and went to find Caleb. She found him at the south fence. She told him plainly what the letter said. She gave it to him and let him read it and waited. He read it twice. He folded it. He put it in his coat pocket. "I'll go see Judge Hollis tomorrow," he said. "You don't have to do anything on account of pressure," Maddie said. "I know that." He looked at her. "I am not doing it on account of pressure." She looked back at him. The heat sat between them in the full afternoon sun. Somewhere nearby, a dry wind moved through the fence line and rattled the wire and died. "What are you doing it on account of?" she said. "I reckon we'll get to that," he said, "in the right time." He pulled on his gloves. "Go on back. Tell Clara she handled that well." Maddie went back. She told Clara. Clara received the information with the expression of someone who already knew she had handled it well and did not particularly need to be told. But she stood a little straighter for the rest of the afternoon. The drought broke on a Wednesday. It came fast the way summer storms in Texas always came, no polite warning, no gradual buildup. 1 hour the sky was the same hammered copper color it had been for 6 weeks, and the next hour the first cloud was there, and then more clouds building from the north with the particular dark intention of a sky that had made up its mind. Caleb came in from the fields and looked at the sky for a long time with his hat in his hand. "Rain," he said. Eli came flying off of the porch. Rain, rain, rain. He had never, as far as anyone in this house could recall, seen a summer storm hit after 6 weeks of drought, and he intended to be present for every second of it. Clara stood in the doorway and looked at the sky with an expression that was trying hard to be practical and was losing the battle. The first drops came 20 minutes later. Big, fat, deliberate drops that hit the dry ground and sent up small clouds of dust on impact, like the earth itself was surprised. Then more. Then the sound of it building, that deep rolling sound that means the whole sky has committed. Caleb brought the horses in. Maddie stood on the new porch under its new roof and listened to the rain come down. She listened to it hit the posts Caleb had cut, and the boards he had set, and the roof he had built, because she had mentioned once in passing that afternoon heat was not her friend. She walked off the porch. She walked into the rain. She just walked off the porch and into it. She wasn't running. She wasn't making a point. She simply moved off the boards and into the open and let the rain come down on her. And it was cold. Finally cold for the first time in 6 weeks, and it soaked through her dress and ran down her face, and she tilted her head back and she laughed. Not performed laughter. Not the kind you produce for an audience. The real kind, the helpless kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere below the ribs when something lands so completely right that the body doesn't know what else to do with it. The drought was over. The ground was drinking. Her dress was soaked. Her boots were soaked. Her hair was soaked flat against her face, and she was standing in a Texas rainstorm in the middle of the yard, and she was laughing, and she did not care about a single one of those things. She heard running behind her. Eli hit her at a full sprint and grabbed her around the middle and shrieked with pure delight at the cold rain coming down, and she grabbed him and held on while he squirmed and laughed and tipped his face up to the sky. Clara walked out in a deliberate, measured way that suggested she had decided to approach the rain with dignity and was already losing her grip on that plan. Within 30 seconds, she was soaked and had abandoned dignity entirely. Maddie looked across the yard, Caleb was standing at the barn door, where the overhang kept him dry. His arms were crossed, and he was watching her. Just watching, not moving, not speaking, just watching her the way a man watches something he did not expect and cannot find words for yet. She met his eyes across the rain. She did not look away. He did not look away. He pushed off the barn door and walked into the rain. He walked all the way across the yard to where she was standing with Eli still attached to her side, and Clara spinning in circles nearby. He stopped in front of her. He was soaked through inside of 10 steps, but he did not seem to notice or care. He looked at her face in the rain. He reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small piece of blue cloth, a scrap like the remnant of a cut, the same shade as the fabric on the table in the kitchen. "I had this in my pocket," he said. "Couple days now." She looked at the scrap of cloth in his wet hand. "Why?" she said. "Because I was trying to figure out the right way to say something." He looked at it, then at her. "I have not been good at saying things. Catherine used to say I would take 3 weeks to tell someone their house was on fire." He paused. "I have been telling myself I needed the right moment. The right words." "Caleb, I am not a man who does things halfway," he said. "I built that porch because you were hot. I bought that fabric because you wouldn't buy it for yourself. I asked Clara and Eli to set a proper place at the family table for you last Sunday because you had been setting everyone else's place for 6 weeks and sitting at the edge of your own." He stopped, breathed. "I did not do those things because you are good help, Maddie. I did them because somewhere in the last 6 weeks, I stopped being able to think about what this house looks like without you in it." The rain came down around them. Eli had gone very still against her side. Clara had stopped spinning. "I have not got much to offer," Caleb said. "The ranch is behind. The well is still low rain or no. Clara is 9 years old going on 45, and Eli calls you home like it is the most obvious thing in the world." Something in his expression, something that had been held together for a long time, finally let go around the edges. "But I want to ask you, not because of the letter or the judge or Ruth Pritchard or any reason outside this yard." He looked at her straight on, rain running down his face, his hat soaked through. "I want to ask you because I love you, and I have been looking for the right words for 2 weeks, and I think the right words are just those ones." Maddie stood in the rain and looked at him. "Caleb Whitaker," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You are doing this in the middle of a rainstorm with both children watching." "I am aware of that," he said. "I did not plan the rain." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were wet, and it was not entirely the rain. "I do not love you because you came into my house and fed my children," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I love you because when you saved us, you let us save you too, and I think that is the braver thing. I think that took more out of you than any of the rest of it." He held out the scrap of blue cloth, wet now darker blue in the rain, the same blue as the dress she had started making. "I am asking you to stay, not as hired help, not as whatever Ruth Pritchard has decided to call it. I am asking you to stay as mine." He paused. "If you'll have me." Maddie Bell stood in the first rain after the longest drought of a long and difficult summer, soaked to the bone, with a 5-year-old pressed against her ribs and a 9-year-old 15 feet away, doing a very poor job of pretending she was not watching, and she looked at this man who had burned a letter for her and built a porch for her and walked across a rainstorm to hand her a piece of blue cloth from his coat pocket. She thought about the road west. She thought about the door that had been unlatched. She thought about one night that had become 6 weeks, that had become a family, that had become something she could not have named the day she left Meridian, but could name now, clearly in the rain, without a single doubt. "Yes," she said. Eli made a sound that was somewhere between a cheer and a roar, and launched himself at Caleb with both arms, and Caleb caught him and held him up, and the boy shrieked with rain-soaked delight. Clara walked over. She walked over and stood in front of Maddie and looked up at her with those gray eyes, those old, careful, storm-gray eyes that had been watching and measuring and deciding, since the first night, since the kitchen knife, since the biscuits and the apron and the public picnic and the dark storeroom and the name that had slipped out of its own accord one morning over a burned palm. "Ma, Maddie," Clara said. This time she did not take it back. This time she said it like she meant it, like she had been carrying it for a while and was done carrying it alone. Maddie opened her arms. Clara walked into them without any more deliberation than that, and Maddie held her in the rain and felt the girl's rigid shoulders drop, really drop, the way they only do when a person has finally decided they are somewhere safe, and neither of them said anything at all for a long moment. Caleb stood nearby with Eli on his hip. All four of them soaked to the skin, rain coming down hard, and the parched ground drinking every drop it could hold. He looked at Maddie over Clara's head. She looked back at him. "She thought I asked for one night. I asked for 6 weeks. I asked for one more morning, and then one more after that. She thought Clara was right. That is how it works." She held the girl a little tighter, and the rain kept falling, and the ground that had been cracked and dry and waiting finally got what it needed. And Martha Bell stood in the middle of it, and was for the first time in longer than she could honestly account for, completely and entirely home. The rain stopped sometime before dawn. Maddie heard it go quiet, that specific absence of sound after hours of falling water, a silence that still had moisture in it. She lay still on the cot and listened to the house dripping from every eave, and she thought about the word yes, and what it weighed, and what it cost, and what it opened all at the same time. Then she got up. She made coffee. She was at the stove when Caleb came out. He stopped in the doorway the way he always did, but this morning he did not sit right away. He stood there and looked at her. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he said. He came in and sat down. She poured his coffee. He drank it. After a while he said, "I want to do this right." She looked at him over her shoulder. "The wedding," he said. "Not because of Ruth Pritchard or Judge Hollis or the county clerk, because you deserve to have it done right." He turned the cup in his hands. "What do you want?" "I have had a wedding before. This is your first one. What do you want it to look like?" Maddie stood still for a moment. Nobody had asked her that before. Not about anything this size. "Small," she said. "The children. Judge Hollis. A few people who have been decent to us." She paused. "In the yard, at sunset." "That's all. That's everything," she said. "That's exactly what I want." Caleb nodded once. "Then that is what we'll do." Clara, who had come in during this conversation under the pretense of needing water and had been quietly not listening from the corner, with considerable effort turned around and said, "I want to do the flowers." "There aren't many flowers left in August," Maddie said. "I know where some are." Her voice carried the clipped certainty of someone who had been thinking about this longer than the conversation had existed. "All right," Maddie said. "The flowers are yours." Clara went back to her water with the bearing of a person who has just been handed an important commission and intends to honor it completely. From the table, Eli said, "I want to wear my good shirt." "You can wear your good shirt," Caleb said. "Will there be pie?" "There will be pie," Maddie said. Eli went back to his slate. "Then I think the wedding is going to be good," he said. The wedding was set for Saturday. Maddie made her dress from the blue cotton on Wednesday and Thursday, working by lamplight after the children were in bed, because she wanted it done without anyone watching. It was not a complicated dress. She had not made complicated things for herself in years. But the blue was right, and the fit was right. And when she put it on Friday morning, just to check the hem, Clara came in and stopped and looked at her the way a person looks at something they were not fully prepared to see. "You look different," Clara said. "It's just the color," Maddie said. "No," Clara said. "It's not just the color." She looked for another moment. Then she went to do her chores without saying what else it was. But she came back that afternoon with a small bundle of late summer wildflowers, goldenrod and ironweed, and a few sprigs of something purple. Maddie did not know the name of, tied with a piece of twine and arranged with the careful asymmetry of a child who has studied the problem seriously. She set them on the kitchen table and looked at Maddie. "For tomorrow," she said. "They're beautiful," Maddie said. Clara straightened the twine. I found them by the east fence line. There's a low spot there where the water collected from the rain. Things grew." She smoothed a stem. "Things grow after rain," she said, more to herself than to Maddie. "They do," Maddie said. Saturday came in hot and golden, the way late summer days come, in Texas when the drought has broken, and the air has gone clean, and the light has that particular quality of something new after something hard. Judge Hollis arrived at midday, a spare man with a good handshake and no wasted words, which Caleb appreciated and Maddie respected. 3 neighboring families had been invited. 2 came. The Morrisons brought their children and a jar of honey. The Garcias brought tamales wrapped in cloth and a handshake from Mr. Garcia that lasted long enough to be a statement. Eli stood in his good shirt with his hair slicked flat by his own hand and his boots cleaned by Clara's direction, and his entire face arranged into the expression of a boy who has decided this is a solemn occasion and is rising to meet it. Clara wore her blue dress. Her hair was braided and pinned, and she had the wildflowers in her hands, holding them with the careful formality of someone performing an official function. They were in the yard, where Maddie had said. The late sun was doing exactly what late sun does in August, coming in long and warm and amber, making everything it touched look like the best version of itself. Maddie was at the porch door when the wagon came up the road. She heard it before she saw it, wheels on the dry ground, a horse moving slow and deliberate. She looked up. Ruth Pritchard pulled the wagon to a stop at the gate. She sat there for a moment. Straight-backed hands folded exactly as she always sat. She looked at Maddie. Maddie looked at her. Nobody moved. Then Ruth Pritchard climbed down from the wagon with a loaf of bread wrapped in a white cloth and walked through the gate. She stopped in front of Maddie. She held out the bread. She did not say "I'm sorry." She did not explain herself or recant or make a speech. She held out the bread the way you hold out bread as an offering, simple and old, and without elaboration. The way people have been offering bread since before there were words good enough to say what bread means when words aren't enough. Maddie looked at it. She looked at Ruth Pritchard's face, that tight, proud face, and the thing underneath the tightness, the thing that had no comfortable name, the thing that might have been in its most honest form, the particular shame of a woman who had done wrong and could not fully say so, but could not entirely stay silent either. Maddie took the bread. "Thank you, Mrs. Pritchard," she said. She said it evenly, not warm and not cold. Not forgiveness exactly, and not refusal either. Something more honest than both the acknowledgement of a woman who has decided to carry the bread without carrying the history of who handed it to her. Ruth Pritchard's chin moved. Almost a nod. She turned and walked back to her wagon. She did not stay for the wedding, but she had come, and she had brought bread. And Maddie set it on the table with the honey and the tamales, and let it mean exactly what it meant, and not a thing more. The ceremony was short. Judge Hollis read the words. Caleb said his. Maddie said hers plainly in the same voice she used for everything that mattered, the voice that did not perform or flinch. When Judge Hollis said the part about, "I now pronounce you Eli," cheered. Immediately and fully the way he did everything, without waiting to see if cheering was the appropriate response, because in his estimation, there was no question about it. Clara did not cheer. She waited until Caleb had kissed Maddie and the judge had stepped back, and the small crowd had begun to breathe normally again. Then she walked forward and stood in front of Maddie and held out the wildflower's goldenrod ironweed, something purple, and looked up at her with those gray eyes that had been watching and measuring and deciding since the first night, since the kitchen knife, since biscuits and blue fabric and a storeroom door and a name, said twice before it was finally kept. "Ma Maddie," she said. In front of Judge Hollis and the Morrisons and the Garcias and the empty space where Ruth Pritchard's wagon had been. In front of her father and her brother and the late August sun and everything that had happened to get them all to this yard. She said it like she meant it. Like she had been saving it for exactly this moment and was done saving it. Maddie took the flowers. She took Clara's face in her hands. "I will not steal her place," she said quietly. What she had said that first week. What she had meant then and meant more now. "But I will stand in mine." "That is all I wanted," Clara said. That is all I ever wanted." The years that followed were not easy years. No years on a Texas ranch in the 1870s were easy years. The well dropped again in the following summer, and they lost cattle, and the bills from the feed store came back and had to be faced directly rather than rotated to the bottom of the pile. Caleb broke 2 ribs one November and spent 6 weeks slower than he wanted to be, which made him difficult to live with, in the way that only a proud man slowed against his will can be difficult. Maddie developed exactly 0 patience for this, and told him so in plain terms on the 4th day, which he did not entirely appreciate and also in the long run needed. They argued. They worked things out. They argued again. They worked those out too. The ranch recovered. Not all at once. Not dramatically. The way things recover when people decide they are going to do the work required slowly, unglamorously, 1 fenced acre and 1 repaired roof, and 1 good season after another. Until one day you look up and the ledger is not frightening anymore, and the well is holding, and the cattle are fat and the children are growing. The children were growing. Eli grew into exactly the person 5-year-old Eli had suggested he would be. Quiet, observant, generous in the specific way of people who remember what it felt like to need something and have someone provide it without being asked. He was good with animals. He was good with people who were struggling. He had a gift for sitting with someone in difficulty without immediately trying to fix it, which is rarer than most people understand. When he was grown, he worked the ranch beside Caleb, and later he would say, when people asked him what shaped him, that the answer was simple. The first real meal he had eaten after his mother died had been made by a stranger who heard him crying from the road and chose not to keep walking. He said it mattered. He said he had spent his whole life trying to be the kind of person who hears something from the road and stops. Clara became a teacher. This did not surprise anyone who had known her at 9, which was everyone who mattered. She was precise and demanding, and had no patience for students who decided they could not do something before they had fully tried, which was the same impatience she had always had, but was now aimed constructively at a classroom full of children who needed exactly that. She taught in Millhaven for 22 years. The thing people remembered most about Clara Whitaker's classroom was something she said on the first day of every school year to every new group of students from the first year she taught until the last. She would stand at the front of the room and look at her students, the girls especially, though she looked at all of them, and she would say, "I am going to tell you something a woman taught me when I was 9 years old, and half-starved, and too proud to ask for help. She taught me by example, which is the only way certain things can be taught." The students would wait. "She taught me," Clara would say, "that a woman's worth is not measured by what she weighs or who she comes from or who has chosen her or refused her. It is measured by what she does when she sees someone crying from the road. It is measured by whether she keeps walking or whether she stops." She would pause. "Stop," she would say. "Whatever road you are on in this life and whatever it costs you to stop, stop. That is the whole lesson. That is everything else I have to teach you dressed up in different clothes." 22 years, every first day. Not one student forgot it. It was 3 years into the marriage that Caleb told Maddie what he had learned from Judge Hollis. They were on the porch, the shaded west porch, the one he had built for her, which had become their porch in every meaningful sense, the place they came at the end of the day when the work was done. The children were in bed. The air had cooled. The windmill was turning. He said, "I found out something about Ruth Pritchard's letter." Maddie looked at him. "Hollis told me," he said. Ruth did know someone in Lampasas County, a woman named Addie Crane. They had corresponded for years. He was quiet for a moment. Addie Crane told Ruth about a woman in Lampasas who had fed a family through a hard winter when they couldn't pay, cooked for them, brought food to their door, stretched her own means to cover theirs, and never once asked to be reimbursed. He paused. "That was the thing Ruth Pritchard knew about you in Lampasas County." Maddie stared at him. "She knew you were good," he said. "Hollis thinks that was the problem. She could not square a woman who was good with a woman who looked the way she had decided was unacceptable. So she twisted it, told herself you must have had an angle, must have been angling for something." He picked up his coffee cup. She burned the letter she got from Addie Crane so no one would know she had it. Hollis found out another way. Maddie sat with this for a long time. She thought about Lampasas County, about the family she had fed that winter. The Hendersons' 3 children and a sick father and a mother working herself to nothing. She had not told anyone about that. It had not occurred to her to tell anyone. You fed people who needed feeding. That was not a story. That was just what you did. She was afraid of you, Caleb said. I think that's what it was. She didn't know how to hold the two things at once, that you were good and that you were not what she had decided a good woman looked like. Maddie looked at the dark yard for a while. That is the saddest thing I have heard in a long time, she said finally. Caleb looked at her. You're not angry. I was angry, she said. I was angry for a long time. I am not angry anymore. She picked up her mending from the railing. Being angry at Ruth Pritchard takes energy I would rather spend on other things. She looked out at the yard. On this, he looked at the same yard. She was looking at the same ground that had been cracked and parched and desperate when she arrived, that was green now in patches that had a sound garden on the south end and a shaded porch, and 2 children asleep inside, who were against all the odds of drought and grief, and the specific cruelty of a county that had decided what kind of woman was worth keeping entirely fine, more than fine. On this, he agreed. Martha Whitaker became known throughout the county in the years that followed. Not as she had once been known, not with the old words and the old measurements, but as the woman who fed half the county during the drought years. It was not an exaggeration. When the drought came again in 1879, harder this time, more counties, more families Maddie organized. She had no official standing. She had no committee appointment, or church sanction, or letter of authorization. She simply did what she had always done, only larger. She figured out who was hungry, and she fed them. She recruited other women. She stretched resources. She kept track of who needed what and who could spare what. And she moved supplies from one hand to the next without ceremony or record keeping, or the expectation of recognition. She did not do it to be known. She did it because people were hungry and she knew how to feed people. But she was known anyway. That is how it goes with people who do the real work without looking for credit. Eventually, the credit comes looking for them. Women who had not spoken to her at that first church picnic showed up at her door asking to help. She put them to work. Ruth Pritchard sent a donation money, not bread this time, with a note that said, "Only for the families." Maddie put it with the rest and did not make anything of it, which was the exact right thing to do. She was not called the fat widow anymore. Not because she had changed. She was still broad-shouldered, still heavy-set, still exactly as large as she had been the day she walked 6 days to get here. She had not shrunk. She had not become more acceptable in the ways that Ruth Pritchard had originally required. She had simply become undeniable. There is a point a person reaches if they do the work and stay the course, and refuse to be made smaller, where the words that were meant to contain them can no longer hold. The words stop fitting. The people who use them have to find other words, and the other words, when they come, are true ones. The true words for Martha Whitaker were these: she fed people. She stayed. She raised 2 children who turned out to be exactly the kind of people the world needed more of. She loved a man who had forgotten how to believe good things could still happen to him, and she let him love her back, which was the harder of the two. She had once believed in the deep, private place where a woman keeps the things she cannot say aloud, that love was for other women, prettier women, thinner women. Women who took up less space and asked for less and needed less, and were in every measurable way easier to keep. The frontier had taught her otherwise, and this is what it taught her. A home is not given to the deserving. It is not awarded to the pretty or the perfect or the properly sized or the adequately connected. It is built slowly, imperfectly, through burned biscuits and porch building and letters held over lamp flames and names said twice before they are kept and bags packed at midnight and unpacked again. It is built by the brave. And the bravest thing Martha Whitaker ever did was not walking 6 days through open country with bleeding feet and nowhere to go. It was stopping. It was hearing a child cry from the road and choosing not to keep walking. It was staying one night, and then one morning, and then one more, until the staying became a life, and the life became something she would not have traded for any easier road she might have taken. She stopped running, and everything worth having was on the other side of that.